I knew the second I saw that bolt cutter dangling from her hand that the HOA had finally lost its damn mind. It was just past noon when I heard the snap of metal on metal. I'd been in the garage working on my old fishing kayak when the sound made me freeze. My lake gate, custom-built, locked, and marked with a clear "No Trespassing" sign, had just been broken open. When I stepped out, there she was, Regina Fairbanks. 50-something, bleached hair puffed up like a marshmallow, and her floral blouse tucked way too neatly into khakis. She was the vice president of our HOA, and she was halfway through the gate like she owned the place. "Regina," I said, stepping down the porch, "you've got exactly 3 seconds to explain what you think you're doing." She turned around like I was the one trespassing. "Xander Wilcox," she barked, "this lake is part of the community. You can't just gate it off for yourself." "Yes, I can," I said, walking right up to the busted lock hanging from the gate. "This part of the lake is on my property. The HOA map ends 15 feet that way." "You know that." She crossed her arms. "The board voted to reinterpret the property lines. You can't reinterpret a recorded land deed." Regina gave me a tight little laugh like this was a game. "The HOA has authority to regulate shared spaces, and this lake is a shared resource. I'm going for a swim. You can call the board if you have an issue." She took another step past the gate. I whipped out my phone. "Nope, I'm calling the cops." That got her attention. She stopped mid-stride. "You wouldn't dare," she said. "You just committed criminal trespass and property damage." "I absolutely would." I didn't wait for her to respond. I dialed the non-emergency line and explained exactly what happened, who she was, what she did, and that I had security cameras that caught the entire thing. Regina stood there like she was trying to decide if she could outrun the law in loafers. "You're going to regret this," she muttered. I looked at the broken lock. "Yeah." "You are." She finally backed off the property, but not before tossing the bolt cutter onto the grass like it had betrayed her. 15 minutes later, Officer Grant pulled up. I showed him the footage clear as day, Regina cutting the lock and stepping through the gate. "This is textbook trespassing," he said, taking notes. "And if the gate's on your property, she had no right to force it open." Regina tried to spin it when he went to her house, said it was a misunderstanding. Claimed she was inspecting for safety concerns. But Officer Grant wasn't having it. "She's getting charged," he told me that evening. "And if the HOA was involved in this decision, they'll be answering for that too." Good. They'd been pushing boundaries for months, trying to find me for my mailbox color, harassing my neighbor over his garden gnome, and now this. Regina picked the wrong guy to mess with, and I was just getting started. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowner Association stories by the next morning. Half the neighborhood had heard about Regina's stunt. Word traveled fast in Willow Pines, especially when it involved the HOA behaving badly. I woke up to a fresh voicemail from my neighbor 2 doors down, asking if it was true that Regina had been caught red-handed with bolt cutters. I didn't respond. I had bigger things to deal with. I spent the early part of the day at the county recorder's office getting certified copies of my parcel maps, original survey documents, and the title deed, all marked with the county seal. I wanted every inch of my lakefront backed by official documentation. If the HOA wanted to play games with property lines, I was going to bury them in paperwork. Back home, I pulled up the HOA's community charter and bylaws. It was all public, tucked away on their dusty website under an outdated Documents tab. I spent a few hours combing through the language, highlighting every relevant clause about common areas, exclusive use, and easement boundaries. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, that gave them authority over privately owned waterfront property. At around 4 in the afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was Officer Grant again, this time in plainclothes, holding a manila folder. "Got a minute?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him in. He opened the folder on my kitchen table. "So I spoke with the assistant district attorney. They're filing misdemeanor criminal trespass and destruction of property charges against Regina. That's not the end of it, though. He slid a sheet toward me. It was a complaint form, this one filed by Regina herself. "She's claiming you threatened her with physical harm," he said. "She filed it about 2 hours after we left yesterday." I stared at the form. It was absurd. "That's complete fabrication." "Yeah," Grant said, "and your security footage proves it, but it's worth noting this is her trying to build a counter-narrative. The DA's office isn't buying it, but you should be prepared for her to escalate things." "Escalate how?" I asked. "She's still on the HOA board and people like her don't like losing face." "I'd expect some retaliation through official HOA channels, petty citations, harassment, maybe even trying to push for a lien if they manufacture enough bogus fines." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll be ready." After Grant left, I installed 2 additional cameras, one pointed at the driveway, the other watching the backyard fence line. I wasn't taking chances. The sun hadn't even set when the first retaliatory move came. A notice from the HOA was taped to my front door. Violation 327B. Unauthorized modification to fence structure. Apparently, the gate lock I'd replaced after Regina cut through the last one was now considered a non-compliant security fixture under some obscure clause buried deep in the HOA's guidelines. I wasn't even surprised. The next day, I attended the monthly HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse. I hadn't gone to one in over a year. The room was packed more than usual. I spotted Regina seated at the front, flanked by the board president, a man named Harold Vance, who wore a blazer 2 sizes too big and looked like he ironed his tie with a waffle maker. As soon as I walked in, the room got quieter. I ignored it, grabbed the last empty seat and crossed my arms. Harold cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to address a matter that's been circulating regarding a recent incident involving board member Regina Fairbanks and the access path along the western lake boundary." Regina sat upright, her hands folded like a schoolteacher waiting to scold a class. Harold continued. "After reviewing the situation, the board has determined that the lake, while partially bordering private lots, is considered a shared environmental resource. In the interest of community harmony, we are exercising our right to access and inspect the area as needed." I raised my hand. "That's not how property law works. You can't declare a shared resource just because you want to. The county assessor's office has my lot clearly marked, and I've got the certified documents with me." Regina opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "And before you say anything, Regina, I'd be careful. You're currently facing charges for trespassing and property damage. You're not exactly the model of lawful conduct right now." A few people in the crowd murmured. Some leaned closer, whispering to each other. Harold glared at me. "We're not here to argue legalities," he said. "Then why are you pretending you have jurisdiction over land you don't own?" I asked. He avoided the question. "Let's move on to the next agenda item." But the damage was done. Several residents approached me after the meeting, asking about the charges. I didn't give them details, but I told them the truth, that the HOA had overstepped, and now it was in the hands of the legal system. That night, I got a call from a woman I'd never met, Tanya Harlow. She lived on the other side of the lake, about 6 houses down. "I've had problems with Regina too," she said. "Last year she tried to fine me for having a compost bin in my yard, said it was a nuisance structure. I fought it, but they still billed me $300 and threatened a lien." I asked if she had kept the documents. She had. I told her to hold on to them. Over the next week, more neighbors came forward, each with their own Regina story. A disabled veteran who'd been fined for having a flagpole slightly taller than regulation height. A young couple who were told their solar panels violated roofline aesthetics. A retired teacher whose backyard fountain was labeled a water waste hazard, even though she used a closed-loop system. I started compiling everything. Every citation, every complaint, every instance of abuse of power. By the end of the week, I had a folder 3 inches thick. I dropped it off at the office of a local attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. He flipped through it, eyebrows raised. "This is textbook overreach," he said. "And if she's been using her position to target specific individuals, that could open the door to civil liability." Meanwhile, the charges against Regina were moving forward. She was due in municipal court the following Tuesday. I planned to be there. So did Officer Grant. So did Tanya. And so did the veteran with the flagpole. The board tried to hold an emergency vote to shield Regina from consequences, claiming she'd acted in good faith. But too many people were watching now. The vote failed. The night before the court date, I got an email from someone on the board, anonymous, but with enough internal info to prove they were legitimate. They attached copies of a memo Regina had sent to the board 2 weeks before the bolt cutter incident. In it, she wrote, "We must assert control over the lakefront properties. If we don't, individual owners will fence us out entirely. I propose a bold first step: physical presence." It was all there in black and white: premeditation, intent. The whole thing had been planned. She wasn't inspecting anything. She was making a power grab. I forwarded the email to the DA's office. By the time Regina stepped into court the next day, the prosecution had everything they needed. The judge read the memo aloud during pre-trial motions. Regina's lawyer tried to argue it was taken out of context, but it was clear she'd orchestrated the trespass as part of a larger plan. The judge allowed the charges to proceed to trial. Outside the courtroom, a reporter from a local news station caught up with me. "Did you expect it to go this far?" he asked. I looked out at the courthouse steps, where Regina stood alone, pretending to check messages on her phone while board members slowly edged away from her. "I didn't expect it to start with bolt cutters," I said. "But I'm going to make sure it ends with accountability." And I meant it. Because if the HOA thought Regina was the only one under a microscope now, they were in for a rude awakening. The week after the court hearing, Willow Pines hummed with a tension I hadn't felt before. It wasn't just chatter anymore, something had shifted. More houses had small signs in their windows now, hand-painted or printed out. "Private property respected here." A subtle message, but a clear one. Residents were starting to take sides. I spent most of that Monday going through a stack of HOA financial statements Tanya had collected through a Freedom of Information Act request. She dropped them off in a weathered file box, still warm from the sun, along with a quiet warning: "You're going to find something." And I did. Buried in the expense report's daily operations, landscaping, maintenance was a line item coded as community access upgrades. It was charged across 3 separate months in the past year, totaling over $30,000. No further detail, no contractors listed, no invoices matched to it. I cross-referenced it with the board meeting minutes. Nothing. The term wasn't mentioned even once. I called Tanya that evening. "You didn't see this?" I asked, flipping through the pages again. "I saw it," she said, "but I didn't know what to make of it." "Well, I think I do. They've been sitting on misappropriated funds. No paper trail, no approvals, no documentation. That's not sloppy bookkeeping, that's deliberate concealment." Tanya fell quiet. Then she said, "I think you should talk to Bernard." Bernard Langston was the former treasurer of the HOA. He'd resigned 6 months ago with hardly a word, citing health reasons. I'd never met him before, but I remembered the email he sent when he left. It had been unusually vague: no thanks, no goodbyes. Just a single line: "I hope this community finds the transparency it deserves." He lived at the edge of the neighborhood in a cluttered single-story ranch house that looked more like an old bookstore than a home. The front porch was covered in wind chimes and hanging succulents, and a wooden owl stared down from the eaves as I knocked. Bernard answered in a faded flannel, his eyes sunken but sharp. "I was wondering when someone might come around about that," he said, before I even introduced myself. I followed him inside. The living room was lined with filing cabinets and mismatched bookshelves crammed with manila folders and plastic binders. He gestured toward the couch and lowered himself into a creaky desk chair. "I didn't leave because of my health," he said. "That's just what Harold told people." I left because Regina and the board were laundering money through fake improvement projects. I leaned forward. You have proof? Oh, I've got more than that, Bernard said. He reached into the bottom drawer of a locked cabinet and pulled out a black binder labeled Long Lake Access Phase 1. Inside were printed emails, unsigned contracts, and a letterhead from a dissolved shell company called Pineway Development Group. It had no staff, no business license, and no physical address, just a P.O. box in another county. They created a ghost contractor, Bernard said, paid themselves through it. I brought it up in a closed session meeting. Regina told me if I valued my retirement, I'd keep my mouth shut. You're saying she threatened you? She did more than that. 1 week after I refused to sign off on the next disbursement, a complaint was filed against me for unauthorized financial conduct. They tried to have me removed for mismanaging funds I never touched. That's when I walked. I asked for copies. He handed me the whole binder. You going to the police? He asked. I'm going to everyone, I said. The next morning, I filed a report with the Financial Crimes Division at the county sheriff's office. I handed over Bernard's documentation, the HOA financials, and the memo Regina had written about the lake access. The detective who took the report skimmed the binder and raised his eyebrows. This is organized, he muttered, and not in a good way. Later that day, I got a call from the DA's office. They just received a formal request from the sheriff to expand the investigation into the HOA's financial practices. The criminal trespass charges against Regina were still moving forward, but now they were tacking on a separate inquiry: potential fraud and embezzlement. The scope had changed. That night, I met with a group of residents at Tanya's house. There were 12 of us. All had been targeted by the HOA in some way, and every single one of them had a piece of the puzzle. We weren't just dealing with one person's abuse of authority anymore. We were looking at a coordinated effort to extract money from the neighborhood under the guise of community improvement. This isn't just about the lake anymore, I told them. This is about power and greed. And they picked the wrong place for it. What followed was a week of collection, coordination, and caution. Tanya reached out to a local journalist known for covering municipal corruption. She agreed to take a look at the story, and within 3 days, a reporter with a camera crew was filming interviews on the sidewalk outside the clubhouse. Regina wasn't there. Harold, however, gave the most scripted, evasive statement I'd ever seen. The board remains committed to transparency and responsible community oversight. We deny any wrongdoing and are confident the matter will be resolved favorably. By Friday, subpoenas had been issued. First to the HOA's bank, then to their internal communications server. The sheriff's office wasn't playing around. The final blow came on a rainy Monday morning. I was drinking coffee on my porch when a pair of unmarked vehicles pulled up in front of Regina's house. 2 plainclothes officers walked up to her door with a folder and a warrant. 30 minutes later, she was escorted out in a gray raincoat, her hair soaked and her expression blank. Harold wasn't far behind. He was picked up at the office of his insurance company where he worked part-time. One of the other board members, Carol, turned herself in later that afternoon. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, falsification of financial documents, and for Regina, criminal trespass and property damage. The DA's office made a statement that evening, calling it a case of systemic abuse of power masked as community governance. The fallout was swift. Residents demanded a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. The remaining board members resigned en masse. A temporary oversight committee was formed and I was asked to be part of it. I didn't want to run anything, but I did want to make sure it never happened again. That weekend, I walked down to the lake. The new gate stood firm, the lock intact. A couple of neighbors were out fishing near the far end, and a few kids tossed a frisbee near the reeds. No one questioned who owned what. No one trespassed. No one cut anything. I stayed a while, watching the water ripple in the afternoon breeze, thinking about how close we'd come to losing our rights, our peace, and our neighborhood to people who thought power meant ownership. But justice had done its work, and the lake, for the first time in a long while, was still. 2 weeks after the arrests, Willow Pines was holding its breath. The HOA office sat dark, locked from the inside with the blinds drawn. The voicemail was full. The clubhouse, once the site of overreaching declarations and stiff-collared meetings, stood unused except for the sound of wind dragging across its warped signboard. I hadn't seen a single board member in days. The ones who hadn't been arrested had gone silent, likely waiting to see which direction the fallout would land. But the silence didn't last. One morning, Tanya came by with a thick envelope under her arm. She didn't knock, she just opened the screen door and stepped inside like she had something urgent she couldn't say on the porch. "They found the second account," she said, placing the envelope on the table. "What second account?" "Hidden operational fund." Not listed anywhere in the HOA's public ledgers. It was under a dummy LLC, but the routing number matched the HOA's primary banking institution. Bernard flagged it during the audit. I opened the envelope. Inside were printed screenshots of wire transfers, some labeled with vague descriptors like seasonal equipment, others marked simply board discretionary. One deposit was over $22,000 withdrawn 2 days after the annual dues were collected from the neighborhood. Where was the money going? Tanya sat down. That's the thing. The sheriff's department tracked it to a property in Northbridge. It's a private residence, belongs to a cousin of Harold's. Let me guess he doesn't live in Willow Pines. Never has, and Regina signed off on the payment. Her initials are on the authorization form. We both stared at the table for a moment, the weight of it settling in. This wasn't just mismanagement. This wasn't a few shady landscaping bills or overblown citations. This was organized theft, funneling dues from hard-working homeowners into personal accounts hidden behind shell names. "What's the DA doing with it?" I asked. "They've added felony charges, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The detective said it's going federal." I leaned back, jaw tight. "They were robbing us in plain sight. And punishing anyone who noticed," Tanya added. "That's what the fines were, smoke and mirrors." We didn't need to say more. The people of Willow Pines had been treated like tenants on their own land, told to obey rules written in vague language and enforced with threats. And all the while, the board had been draining the neighborhood like a bank account with no password. That afternoon, I attended the first oversight committee meeting. Held in Tanya's garage, it was standing room only. We didn't have elected officials yet, just volunteers with clipboards and legal pads. The county had stepped in to oversee the HOA's restructuring, issuing a temporary freeze on all dues and suspending enforcement powers until the investigation closed. A man named Greg, a retired civil engineer, took the floor. "We've confirmed that over $78,000 were funneled into unauthorized accounts over the last 14 months, he said. "That doesn't include the unapproved fines or the legal fees they charged the HOA to defend themselves." A woman in the back raised her hand. "What happens to that money? Can we get it back?" Greg nodded slowly. "The DA's office has already frozen the assets. Recovery is likely, though it may take months. In the meantime, we'll be establishing a transparent budget and submitting it for full community approval before anything gets spent." A man near the garage door crossed his arms. "And what about enforcement? Are we just going to let people run wild now?" Tanya stepped forward. "Nobody's suggesting anarchy, but enforcement won't come from the top down anymore. We'll set rules together, approve them democratically, and there will be an independent review process if someone's cited. That's how it should have been from the start." Heads nodded around the room. No one wanted chaos. They just wanted fairness. The next few days moved fast. Subpoenas were issued to the HOA's old email servers. Investigators found a chain of messages between Harold, Regina, and 2 now resigned board members discussing how to delay disclosure of financial records to maintain cohesion. One message even suggested falsifying a community vote to justify a special assessment that never took place. Regina's trial date was moved up. The prosecution added charges of financial misconduct and false representation of authority. Her attorney tried to claim she was a passive participant, manipulated by Harold and unaware of the full scheme, but then the prosecution introduced a voice recording. Bernard had recorded a board meeting 2 months before he resigned a closed session where Regina could be heard saying, "We need to make the lake look like a shared space again. If that means violating a few fences, so be it. They'll back down once they see we're not afraid to act." The courtroom was dead silent when it played. Even the judge paused before speaking. "A person in your position," he said, "has a duty to uphold the law, not override it for convenience." Regina was convicted on all counts. She received a 2-year sentence, suspended to 6 months in county jail with community service and 5 years probation. Harold's case was much worse. With wire fraud and money laundering on the table, he was facing federal time. His cousin had already flipped, offering a full testimony in exchange for immunity. The day after the verdict, I walked the edge of my property and unlocked the new gate. The path was clear, the shoreline quiet. A few neighbors had brought kayaks down, their kids throwing stones into the water without a care in the world. I didn't need to say anything to anyone. The lake was mine, yes, but it was also part of a community that had finally taken its power back. A week later, the county approved the formation of a new HOA board, this time with strict limitations on enforcement power and a mandatory audit every 6 months. I declined the invitation to run. I'd done what I came to do. On the last Sunday of the month, we held a neighborhood cookout by the lake. No forms, no permits, no threats of fines, just folding chairs, smoked brisket, and a playlist someone threw together on a Bluetooth speaker. Greg gave a short speech thanking everyone for standing their ground. Tanya brought a cake shaped like a pair of bolt cutters. I stood near the edge of the water, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air smelled like charcoal and cut grass. And for the first time in a long while, Willow Pines didn't feel like a place people were trapped in. It felt like home. Justice had taken its course, and not a single lock was broken that day.